The morning of June 10 dawned crisp and clear over London, the sky a perfect cerulean blue that seemed almost too picturesque to be real. In the hushed, gilded corridors of Clarence House, Catherine, Princess of Wales, stood perfectly still as her dresser made a final, infinitesimal adjustment to the hem of her gown. It was not the familiar crimson of a Welsh Guards uniform, nor the sleek, modern elegance of a designer suit she might have chosen for a solo engagement. The fabric that whispered around her was a deep, regal ivory, a gown of state she had never before worn. Her fingers, usually steady, trembled slightly as they brushed over the intricate silver embroidery. Today, the world would see her not as the radiant, supportive Princess of Wales, but as a queen. And the man who would stand beside her, King William V, was not in the room. He was across the city, in the solitude of Buckingham Palace, preparing to walk a path he had hoped would remain distant for decades to come. The air was thick with a silence that had nothing to do with peace. It was the silence of a nation holding its breath, of a family navigating a chasm of private grief and public duty, and of a woman stepping into a blinding light she had trained for but never imagined would illuminate her so soon. The balcony doors were closed, but beyond them, a murmur was growing into a roar. A crowd of millions in the flesh and, on screens across the globe, gathered not just for a coronation, but for an answer. How did they get here? The question hung, unspoken, in the fragrant air of the room, a mystery wrapped in crown jewels and constitutional crisis. This was not a fairy tale beginning. It was an ending of one era, and a terrifying, abrupt start to another. The story begins not with a crown, but with its absence. 3 months earlier, a chilling fog of uncertainty had descended upon the United Kingdom. King Charles III, having reigned with diligent passion for a shorter time than anyone had anticipated, had withdrawn from public view following what was blandly termed a period of rest on the Sandringham estate. The bulletins from the palace grew increasingly vague, a masterclass in saying nothing with great solemnity. Newspapers filled the void with speculation ranging from a severe bout of influenza to more chronic, worrying concerns. William, the now heir apparent in the most real sense, carried the weight of this unspoken truth in the set of his shoulders. His visits to his father were private, shrouded in a security so intense it spoke volumes. He would return to Adelaide Cottage, the family home in Windsor, his face pale and drawn, the usual easy light in his eyes extinguished. Catherine watched him, her heart a knot of empathy and dread. She managed the routines of their children's lives with a calm ferocity, a bastion of normalcy against the rising tide. One evening, after the children were asleep, William found her in the kitchen. He didn't speak, simply rested his forehead against her shoulder, a gesture about her exhaustion. "It's not a temporary illness, Kate," he whispered, the words muffled against her sweater. It's a withdrawal of spirit. He can't do it. He says the crown is a lead weight and he can't breathe." The confession was treasonous and heartbreaking. The Constitution had no protocol for a monarch simply broken by the burden. While William navigated this intimate, familial collapse, a parallel storm was brewing in the public sphere. The ripple effects of the king's incapacity became waves. Diplomatic tours were cancelled. State papers, symbols of the monarch's role as head of state, piled up and signed. A planned, crucial tour of Commonwealth nations in the Pacific, aimed at steadying rocky relations, was postponed indefinitely, causing diplomatic grumbles to turn into loud complaints. The working royals, a slimmed-down cadre under Charles's model, were stretched impossibly thin. News outlets, no longer able to ignore the elephant in the throne room, began running pointed editorials about a kingdom in stasis and the cost of a shadow monarchy. The pressure crystallized into a single, formal meeting. William was summoned, not as a son, but as the Prince of Wales, to sit with the Prime Minister and the Lord Chancellor in a sombre, wood-panelled room in Westminster. The message was gentle in its phrasing but steel in its intent. The country could not drift. A regency was discussed, a temporary fix where William would act in the king's name. But the legal complexities were a minefield, and the symbolism of a stand-in monarch was seen as weak, both at home and abroad. William argued for more time, for his father's privacy, for a medical solution. The Lord Chancellor, an elderly man who had seen constitutions bend, leaned forward. "Sir, with utmost respect, the monarchy is not a private family matter. It is the beating heart of our system. If the heart falters, the whole body grows weak. A decision must be made, for the stability of the nation. William left the meeting feeling sick. The duty he had been born to was now closing in on him, not as a future promise, but as a present, crushing demand. The inevitable, when it came, was not a grand announcement but a quiet, desperate family council at Sandringham. Charles, looking frail and decades older than his years, sat by a fire that seemed to give no warmth. He spoke not as a king to his heir, but as a broken father to his son. "I tried, William. I truly did. I thought I could mold it, change it, make it fit a modern world. But it is ancient and it is heavy. It does not bend, it only breaks those who try." His voice was a dry leaf rustle. "I cannot go back to London. I cannot put on the uniform and the smile. It is a performance I no longer have the strength to give." Queen Camilla, a portrait of loyal anguish, sat beside him, her hand covering his. It was she who voiced the unthinkable. "Your father," she said, her eyes on William, "needs to lay down the crown. For his health, for his life." The word abdication, banned from palace vocabulary for nearly a century, now hung in the room, stark and shocking. William felt the floor shift. He thought of his grandmother, the late queen, her lifetime of service. He thought of the scandal and pain of his great-uncle's abdication, a wound that had never fully healed. "The institution might not survive it," William said, his voice hoarse. "The people, they've had so much change, so much drama." Charles looked at him, his eyes brimming with a terrible apology. "Then, you must make them believe. You, and Catherine. You must be so solid, so radially capable, that my stepping aside looks not like a failure, but like a passing of the torch to a new, brighter flame. It is the only way." The burden transferred in that moment, not with ceremony, but with a look of profound sorrow. William's future, and Catherine's, was rewritten in the space of a heartbeat. In the weeks that followed, a machine of immense discretion and precision whirred into action. Codenamed Operation Sphere, the transition plan was a closely guarded secret among a handful of senior courtiers, the Prime Minister, and the Archbishop of Canterbury. William and Catherine were thrust into a twilight world of covert preparations. Their public engagements became fewer, but more significant, carefully crafted images of poised unity. Meanwhile, in private, they were immersed in a crash course of kingship. Constitutional lawyers briefed William late into the night on the immediate powers he would wield. Catherine sat with the keeper of the privy purse, absorbing the dizzying complexities of the royal finances and the estates she would soon help oversee. There were moments of surreal normality amidst the chaos, helping George with his maths homework, then, an hour later, reviewing the order of service for an accession council. The strain was immense, but it forged a new depth between them. One afternoon, while practicing the correct angle for wearing the imperial state crown with a weighted replica, William suddenly put it down and sank into a chair. "I feel like an imposter, Kate. A boy playing dress-up in his grandfather's clothes." Catherine knelt before him, taking his hands. "You are not an imposter. You are William. The same boy who dragged me to see homeless shelters, who worries about Earthshot, who reads bedtime stories with silly voices. The crown doesn't change that, it just gives you a bigger platform to be that man. And I will be right beside you, every single step." It was her unwavering certainty that became his anchor. She began her own, quiet preparation, studying the speeches and style of Queen's consort past, but always filtering it through her own modern, empathetic lens. She worked with a discreet designer on a wardrobe for the transition, clothes that spoke of tradition but felt like her elegant armor for what was to come. The couple knew the official announcement of Charles's abdication and William's accession would be a global earthquake. Their debut as king and queen would have to be, in the very next breath, a bomb. They had one chance to get it right, to unite a grieving, skeptical nation and a watching world. The countdown had begun, and the first act would be a walk onto a balcony, into a future neither of them had chosen, but which they were now determined to define together. The news broke on a Tuesday morning, not with a palace flourish, but in a stark, one-page statement from Buckingham Palace. It spoke of King Charles III's irreversible decision to abdicate for reasons of health and well-being, expressing his lasting love for the people of the United Kingdom and the Commonwealth and his profound confidence in his successor. The world seemed to stop for a moment. Social media platforms, news tickers, radio broadcasts all stuttered, then erupted. The shock was visceral, a collective gasp. In pubs, offices, and homes, conversations halted. This was history, raw and unfolding, not in a dusty textbook, but in real time. The following days were a maelstrom. News channels ran endless panels of historians, constitutional experts, and talking heads debating the ramifications. There was public sympathy for Charles, but it was tinged with bewilderment and, in some quarters, a sense of betrayal. The word abdication carried the bitter ghost of 1936, of love chosen over duty. This was different, but the unease was similar. Could the monarchy, already streamlined and modernized, withstand another seismic shock? The focus, inevitably and intensely, turned to William and Catherine. Paparazzi lenses, like predatory insects, swarmed around Windsor. Every glimpse of them was analyzed, Catherine driving the children to school, a practiced smile on her face, William leaving a meeting, his expression grave. The narrative was being written in pixels and headlines: Can young Wales steady the ship? Kate's trial by fire. The pressure inside their private world was inversely proportional to the calm they projected outside. Amidst this global noise, a series of critical, clandestine meetings shaped the tangible path forward. The most pivotal was William's first official audience with the Prime Minister as the incoming king. It was held not in the grand confines of Buckingham Palace, but in the more neutral, bookline study of the PM's country residence, Chequers. The formality was palpable. Your Majesty, the Prime Minister began, the title feeling foreign on his tongue. They discussed the immediate timeline, the formal proclamation council, the necessity of a swift but dignified coronation to cement stability, and the delicate matter of Charles and Camilla's titles and future role. William was clear and firm. My father will be known as the Prince of Wales once more, he stated, a move both respectful and symbolically clearing the slate. And he and my stepmother will retain their royal status but will withdraw entirely from public life. Their need for privacy is absolute. He also insisted that the coronation, while adhering to its sacred core, must feel accessible. Less gold leaf, more heart, he said, surprising the traditionalists in the room. Meanwhile, Catherine was engaged in her own quiet diplomacy. She hosted a private tea for the 3 living former prime ministers at Kensington Palace. It was a masterstroke. Over china cups and lemon cake, she listened more than she spoke, absorbing their wisdom on navigating the nexus of politics and public life. She asked thoughtful questions about their families, about the personal cost of service. By the end, these political warhorses, often at each other's throats, were united in admiration for her. She has a steel core, that one was heard to remark later. But it's wrapped in velvet. For Catherine, the preparation was as much emotional as it was procedural. She sought private counsel, not from stylists, but from those who understood unique burdens. A discreet, hours-long conversation was arranged with the Countess of Wessex, Sophie, whose own journey into the royal fold had been one of steady, dignified integration. Sophie's advice was practical and grounding: find your few things, the causes that burn in your heart, not just the ones on the list. And protect the silly moments with the children like they are state secrets. They are your real oxygen. Catherine also requested a private, unrecorded video call with former First Lady Michelle Obama. The 2 women, from vastly different worlds, shared the experience of life under a blinding spotlight. They spoke of raising children in a fishbowl, of maintaining a marriage as an institution within an institution, of using soft power to ignite hard change. The platform is a gift, Michelle advised, but remember, you are the message. Your authenticity is your strength. Don't let them polish the you out of you. These conversations fortified Catherine. She began to compile a private journal, not of protocol, but of intentions. On one page, she wrote, to listen first. To see the person, not just the problem. To make mental health not just a speech topic, but the lens through which we work. She was building her own internal constitution. The children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, were the epicenter of their parents' world, and their needs dictated the family's delicate dance. William and Catherine were determined that their ascent would not be their children's trauma. A family meeting was held in the cozy sitting room of Adelaide Cottage, with a trusted child psychologist present to help guide the conversation. Using simple, clear language, William explained that grandfather Charles was very tired from his big job and needed to rest forever. Which means, Catherine said gently, taking George's hand, that Daddy has to take on a very important job for the country. It will mean some changes. We will move to a bigger house in London. There will be more people taking pictures, and sometimes Mummy and Daddy will have to go to very big, serious parties called ceremonies. Little Louis asked if he could go to the parties and wear a crown. Charlotte, perceptive beyond her years, looked worried. Will people bow to us now? William pulled her onto his lap. Some people might, because of the job I have. But that's just a silly rule. To us, you will always just be our Lottie, who is brilliant at football and makes the best funny faces. They established new, non-negotiable family rituals, pizza and film Friday no matter where in the world they were, a secret knock for entering each other's bedrooms in the new palace apartments, and a worry jar where the children could post any fears to be discussed at Sunday breakfast. The move to Buckingham Palace was orchestrated like a military operation for their sake. Their new wing was decorated first, with their own furniture and toys transported to make an alien space feel like home. The first night there, they all camped out in a fort of sheets in the vast drawing room, eating popcorn and telling stories, the sound of their laughter echoing down the historic corridors, a promise of life amidst the grandeur. The day of the Proclamation Council arrived, the first official, constitutional act of the new reign. For the public, it was a live-streamed ceremony of antique pageantry. For William, standing in the grand, crowded room at St. James's Palace, it was an out-of-body experience. Dressed in a formal morning suit, he listened as the Garter King of Arms proclaimed the sonorous words, "We now, with one voice and consent of tongue and heart, publish and proclaim that Prince William Arthur Philip Louis is now, by the death of our late sovereign of happy memory, our only lawful and rightful liege lord, William V, by the grace of God, of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland and of his other realms and territories, King, head of the Commonwealth, defender of the faith." The titles cascaded over him, a weight of history and expectation. His eyes found Catherine, standing with the other senior royals. She was not in ivory yet, but in a dignified dove-gray coat dress. She met his gaze and gave a nearly imperceptible nod, a tiny smile touching her lips. It was a lifeline. In that moment, the protocol faded. He wasn't just King William V. He was William, and Kate was with him. After the proclamation, they appeared briefly on the balcony of Friary Court. The crowd below was immense, a sea of upturned faces. They waved, the gesture feeling both strange and instinctive. The cheers were warm, curious, supportive, but laced with an audible uncertainty. This was the first test. William leaned close to Catherine, a gesture picked up by every camera. "Ready," he murmured, words lost to the wind. She nodded, slipping her hand into his. It was a small, human gesture in the midst of grand ceremony. A spontaneous, louder cheer went up. The photo of that moment, his head inclined toward hers, their hands joined, a look of mutual fortitude passing between them, would be on the front page of every newspaper the next day. The caption was universal: "Together." It was the first brick in the foundation they were building. The long, formal journey to the throne had begun, but the real work, the work of winning hearts, of defining their reign, started with that single, silent clasp of hands against the roar of a new and uncertain world. The machinery of a new reign now moved with a relentless, quiet hum. William and Catherine traded the relative cocoon of Windsor for the overwhelming reality of Buckingham Palace. Their private apartments, though grand, felt initially like a museum suite, all silk wall coverings and portraits of stern ancestors. Catherine's first act was to have the children's artwork framed and hung in the hallways, a splash of chaotic color against the formality. William commandeered a small, sunlit office that had been a staff sitting room, filling it with modern furniture, photographs of his family and his Earthshot prize winners, and a detailed model of a hydrogen-powered airplane, a statement of intent. They were imprinting themselves on the institution, room by room. Their days became a meticulously choreographed ballet of duty and family. Mornings began with breakfast with the children at 7:30 a.m., a rule enforced by Catherine. Then, while the children were taken to school, William would dive into his famous red boxes, the leather cases containing government documents requiring the sovereign's review and signature. He approached them not as a rubber stamp, but with a sharp, inquisitive mind, often querying his private secretaries on points of policy, determined to understand the nuance of every paper he signed. Catherine, meanwhile, held her first solo meetings as queen. She gathered the heads of her court charities in the palace's Chinese drawing room. "I don't want to just be a patron," she told them, her voice firm. "I want to be a partner. Show me the data, the challenges, the gaps. Let's work on solutions, not just visibility." It was a shift in tone, from benevolent figurehead to strategic champion. The first major test of their united front was a pre-coronation tour of the United Kingdom, a thank you and hello tour designed to connect directly with the people. The pressure was immense. Every outfit, every word, every interaction would be dissected. Their first stop was Cardiff, Wales. As they stepped out into the grey drizzle, the crowd was dense but the atmosphere was watchful, even wary. Wales had a complex relationship with the monarchy, and Charles had been a passionate Prince of Wales. William, now king, was an unknown quantity. Catherine, sensitive to the mood, chose to wear a coat in deep Welsh red. They spent hours at the barriers, not just waving, but stopping, kneeling down to speak to children, listening to elderly well-wishers share memories of the late Queen. William, in a heartfelt speech in Welsh and English at the Senedd, acknowledged the unique history and spirit of Wales and spoke of his duty to serve all parts of his kingdom with humility and respect. He didn't shy away from the past, referencing his father's deep connection to the nation, but pivoted gracefully to a future of partnership. In a Cardiff community centre, Catherine joined a pottery class for young mothers, sitting at the wheel and laughing as she tried to shape a lump of clay, getting as messy as anyone else. The images were human, relatable. The Welsh media, initially skeptical, began to soften. "A different kind of royalty," one headline read. The tour continued to Scotland, where they faced a different kind of scrutiny amidst a strong nationalist movement. At the Palace of Holyrood House in Edinburgh, they hosted a reception for Scots from all walks of life. William, in a kilt of the royal Stuart tartan, spoke plainly. "I know my title comes with history, some of it painful. I cannot change the past, but I can strive to ensure the crown is a force for unity and recognition in the future." It was a bold acknowledgement, avoiding defensiveness. Catherine, visiting a cutting-edge marine research institute in St. Andrews, the place where their own story began, spoke with genuine passion about environmental stewardship, her knowledge impressing the scientists. She connected it back to the landscape and people of Scotland, making global issues feel local. The tour's climax was in Belfast, Northern Ireland. Security was extreme, the political tensions palpable. Their schedule was a tightrope walk of symbolism. They visited an integrated school where Protestant and Catholic children learned together, sharing a laugh with pupils over a chaotic science experiment. They laid a wreath at a memorial for all victims of the Troubles, a simple, solemn act of respect that spoke volumes. In every location, their strategy was the same: substance over spectacle, listening over lecturing, partnership over patronage. By the time they returned to London, the public narrative had shifted. The watchfulness had warmed into a growing curiosity and, in many quarters, a cautious optimism. They were not just younger versions of what came before, they were something new. Behind the scenes, the coronation planning was reaching fever pitch. William and Catherine were deeply involved, determined to balance of tradition with a clear, contemporary relevance. They made key decisions together. The guest list was to be radically inclusive. Alongside peers and heads of state, there would be hundreds of community heroes, nurses, teachers, volunteers, environmental activists nominated by the public. The music would blend majestic hymns with a newly commissioned piece by a popular, contemporary British composer and a performance by a diverse national children's choir. Catherine worked closely with designers on her coronation gown. It would incorporate traditional symbols, the rose, thistle, shamrock, and daffodil, but embroidered in a modern, artistic style. She also insisted on including, hidden within the seams, small pieces of lace from her own wedding veil and a scrap of fabric from one of her children's baby blankets, a personal talisman. William was focused on the oath. He practiced the ancient words until they felt less foreign, wanting to mean every syllable. He also insisted the ceremony explicitly mention service to all faiths and none, reflecting modern Britain. One evening, exhausted from a day of fittings and briefings, they sat in their private sitting room. "Are we trying to change too much too fast?" William wondered aloud, massaging his temples. Catherine looked at him, a sketch of her gown in her lap. "We're not changing the heart of it. We're just making sure the heart beats in a way people today can feel." "That's not change, William. That's preservation." Her clarity cut through his doubt. As the coronation day drew near, a final, private pilgrimage took place. One misty afternoon, with no fanfare, a single car drove William and Catherine to the Windsor estate. They walked alone through the parkland to a simple, secluded burial ground. Before them were the headstones of Queen Elizabeth II and Prince Philip. They stood in silence for a long time, the only sound the wind in the ancient oaks. William placed a hand on his grandmother's stone. "I wish you were here to tell me how to do this," he said, his voice thick. Catherine linked her arm through his. "In a way, she is. Every lesson in duty, in quiet perseverance, in putting the we before the I, that's her. You carry that." They then visited the modest grave of his mother, Diana. This was more emotionally charged. Catherine laid a small bouquet of forget-me-nots, Diana's favorite flower. "We'll try to bring that warmth, that human touch," she whispered. "For you." It was a moment of profound connection across generations, a drawing of strength from the women who had shaped the monarchy's recent past. As they drove back to London, the setting sun broke through the clouds, bathing the city in a golden light. William looked at Catherine, her profile etched against the window. The anxiety was still there, a constant hum, but it was now underpinned by a solid, shared resolve. They were not just fulfilling a duty handed to them, they were honoring a legacy while forging their own. The final preparations were complete. The world was waiting. Their debut as king and queen was no longer an impending event, it was the next sunrise, bringing with it a day that would etch their names, and their partnership, into history. They were as ready as they would ever be. The dawn of Coronation Day arrived, not with the predicted rain, but with a spectacular, clear golden sunrise over London. It felt like a benediction. In the hushed, sacred privacy of the king's dressing room at Buckingham Palace, William stood motionless as the crimson robe of state was fastened over his uniform. The weight of the fabric was significant, a physical anchor. His mind, however, was preternaturally calm. The frantic months of preparation, the doubt, the grief, had all funneled into this singular point of focus. He thought of his father, who had called him at dawn, his voice frail but clear. "You are ready, my boy. Be the king your grandmother believed you could be." In her own suite, Catherine was a vision of serene concentration. Her ladies-in-waiting, a small group of close, trusted friends, helped her into the ivory gown. As they settled the heavy, symbolic train, there was no chatter, only a respectful quiet. Catherine caught her own reflection in the full-length mirror. The woman staring back was familiar, yet transformed not by the jewels or the embroidery, but by the profound gravity in her own eyes. She placed the diamond and pearl pendant William had given her after Louis's birth around her neck, a private touch against the historic grandeur. Down the hall, George, Charlotte, and Louis, dressed in their own finely tailored outfits, were supervised by their beloved nanny, Maria. George, understanding the import of the day, stood very straight. Charlotte kept smoothing her dress, a mix of excitement and nerves. Louis whispered, "Is it time for the big crown yet?" The palace, usually a hive of staff, felt like a held breath. The procession to Westminster Abbey was a river of color and sound that snaked through the heart of London. Millions lined the streets, a tapestry of Union Jacks and hopeful faces. William and Catherine traveled in the Diamond Jubilee State Coach, its glass windows offering them to the world. The roar of the crowd was a physical force, a wall of sound that vibrated through the gilded carriage. William, in his uniform, waved, his expression one of solemn appreciation. Catherine, radiant in ivory, smiled, her eyes scanning the crowds, connecting with individual faces where she could. Inside the coach, however, their hands were tightly clasped, hidden from view. "All right?" William mouthed over the din. She nodded, squeezing his fingers. It was their secret language, a pulse of solidarity amidst the overwhelming spectacle. For the people watching, it was pure pageantry. For them, it was the final, public journey toward an irreversible transformation. Inside the ancient abbey, the air was thick with the scent of old stone, beeswax, and expectation. The world's dignitaries, from presidents to princes, sat in silent awe. The community heroes, in their simple best, looked around with wide, disbelieving eyes. As the solemn chords of the processional music swelled, William walked alone down the long aisle, following the Archbishop of Canterbury. Every step echoed. He felt the weight of every gaze, the ghosts of every monarch crowned before him in this same space. He knelt at the chair of estate, looking utterly alone under the towering stained glass. Then, the music changed, and all heads turned. Catherine, on the arm of her father, Michael Middleton, began her walk. She moved with a graceful, steady pace, her train flowing behind her. Her face was a masterpiece of calm dignity, but her eyes were fixed on William at the far end of the aisle. In that moment, she was not just a queen consort processing, she was a wife walking toward her husband in his most vulnerable, exposed moment. Her presence seemed to steady the very air. As she took her seat beside the throne, she gave him the briefest, most intimate smile. He was no longer alone. The ceremony itself was a profound, spiritual marathon. The recognition, where William was presented to the people of the four corners of the kingdom, and the thunderous "God Save King William," that shook the abbey walls. The oath, where he swore to govern with justice and mercy, his voice clear and unwavering. The anointing, the most sacred moment, hidden from cameras by a gold cloth canopy as holy oil was traced on his hands, breast, and head. This was the moment of divine blessing, stripping away the man and sanctifying the monarch. When the canopy was removed, William looked changed, his face etched with a deep, spiritual seriousness. Then came the investiture. One by one, the symbols of sovereignty were presented: the spurs, the sword, the armils, the orb, the ring, the scepters. Finally, the archbishop lifted St. Edward's crown high above William's head for a suspended, silent moment, before lowering it gently into place. The weight was immense, both physical and metaphysical. As he was turned to face the abbey, crowned and holding the scepters, the congregation erupted. Trumpets blared. The cry of "God Save the King" was deafening, a wave of acceptance and acclamation. William's eyes found Catherine's. In her gaze, he saw not just pride, but a reflection of his own awe, and a shared understanding of the incredible journey that had brought them here. Her coronation as queen consort followed, a simpler but no less moving ritual. As her smaller, lighter crown was placed on her head, she became, officially, his queen. They then partook of Holy Communion together, side by side, a moment of quiet unity before the final fanfare. The return procession was a carnival of joy. The crowned king and queen, now in the larger, more opulent gold state coach, were met with even more ecstatic cheers. The sun glinted off the crown jewels, creating a dazzling spectacle. Inside the rocking coach, however, a more private moment unfolded. William reached up and, carefully, almost reverently, touched the band of gold on his head. "It's heavier than I imagined," he said to Catherine, his voice barely audible over the crowd. She smiled, a real, warm smile that reached her eyes. "You wear it well," she replied. For the first time that day, the public mask slipped completely between them. He grinned back, a flash of the old William, the boyish, relieved grin. It was the grin of a man who had climbed the mountain and, against all odds, reached the summit with his partner beside him. They waved to the delirious crowds, the image of confident, joyful sovereignty. The balcony appearance at Buckingham Palace was the final, iconic scene. The newly crowned king and queen stepped out, flanked by their beaming children and key members of the family. The sight of the family unit, with George, Charlotte, and Louis peering over the edge in wonder, was powerfully humanizing. The RAF flypast roared overhead, trailing red, white, and blue smoke. William kept his arm around Catherine, his hand resting protectively on George's shoulder. As they waved, Catherine leaned her head slightly against William's shoulder for just a second, a gesture of pure, unguarded affection and exhausted happiness. The crowd's roar reached a fever pitch. This was the picture the world would remember, not just a coronation, but a coronation of a family. A new chapter, not of solitary burden, but of shared purpose, had officially begun under the bright June sky, with the cheers of a hopeful nation ringing in their ears, and the unbreakable bond between them as their foundation. The echo of the coronation cheers took weeks to fade, but, for William and Catherine, the true work began in the quiet that followed. The brilliant spectacle was now replaced by the steady, unglamorous rhythm of monarchy. Their first official act as fully fledged king and queen was a decision that surprised many. They declined the traditional extended post-coronation retreat. Instead, after a single weekend of private rest with their children at Sandringham, they returned to London and dived into the heart of the issues they cared about. William convened an unprecedented roundtable at Buckingham Palace, gathering tech CEOs, media executives, and mental health experts to address the epidemic of online bullying and its impact on young people. He didn't just listen, he challenged the room. "We have the innovation to put a rover on Mars," he said, his tone serious. "Surely we have the ingenuity to make our digital world, especially for our children, a place of safety and connection, not fear and loneliness." It was a king speaking not as a figurehead, but as a father and a modern leader, using his convening power for tangible progress. Catherine, meanwhile, launched the Early Years Commonwealth Initiative, traveling not to capital cities, but to community centers in places like South Africa, Jamaica, and Fiji. She sat on floors with mothers and caregivers, listening to their challenges. She used these stories to lobby, via video link, health ministers from across the Commonwealth, pushing for policy changes and investment. Her approach was data-informed but heart-led, and it was resonating. They were proving that the crown was not just a symbol, but a platform for advocacy. Their reign's character was further defined by a conscious breaking of old patterns. They accepted an invitation for a casual, off-the-record dinner at the home of a leading environmental activist, a move that would have been unthinkable in previous eras. They hosted a Youth Perspectives weekend at Balmoral, inviting 24 young people from across the UK, apprentices, artists, scientists, carers, to camp on the estate and have frank conversations with them about the future. William and Catherine cooked burgers on a grill, joined in on hikes, and listened far more than they spoke. The images, released later by the palace, were revolutionary, the king in a wax jacket laughing as a teenager beat him at a game of giant Jenga, the queen helping to pitch a tent. This was a monarchy with its sleeves rolled up, accessible and in touch. They also made a subtle but significant change to the royal calendar. They reduced the number of large, formal garden parties and replaced some with smaller, thematic receptions celebrating specific sectors: British manufacturing, renewable energy pioneers, frontline emergency workers. The atmosphere was less stiff, the conversations deeper. The public, used to seeing royals as distant icons, began to see them as engaged stewards. The personal balance, however, remained their constant and most delicate challenge. The world now referred to their homes as palaces and castles, but, within those walls, they fought for normality. Catherine was militant about the children's schedules. School runs were done by her or William whenever possible, using discreet security measures. Homework was done at the kitchen table in the Buckingham Palace apartment, which now felt genuinely lived in, scattered with schoolbooks and Lego projects. They instituted no-tech Sundays, where the entire family, parents included, would leave devices in a box and go for long walks in the palace gardens, play board games, or bake. One Sunday, an aide urgently needed William's signature on a time-sensitive document. He found the king in the palace's old bowling alley, locked in a fiercely competitive match with George, both of them kneeling on the floor to aim, while Charlotte kept score and Louis cheered indiscriminately. William signed the paper with a flourish, a spot of ink on his jeans, and immediately went back to his game. The aide left, smiling. The message was clear: family was the non-negotiable core. Catherine also carved out a small, sunny room in the palace as her personal studio, where she could paint and pursue her photography, a sanctuary for her own creativity away from the public eye. These pockets of ordinary life were their secret weapon against the surreal pressures of their roles. The relationship with the past, particularly with Charles and Camilla, was handled with graceful compassion. Charles, now styling himself the Prince of Wales again, resided mostly at Highgrove, immersed in his beloved gardens and painting. The public rarely saw him, and he offered no commentary on the new reign.